Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. All I wanted was peace, a quiet mountain retreat far from HOA meetings and gluten arguments. But one perfect view turned into a war zone, and I became the enemy of a neighborhood I didn't even belong to. Welcome to the battle for the skyline, and it's about to get personal. I never planned to make enemies with a neighborhood I didn't even live in. All I wanted was peace, a few acres of silence, a breath of alpine air, and maybe someday, a deck where I could sip coffee and listen to the wind instead of my ex-wife yelling about her gluten allergy. That's why I left Austin after the divorce. That's why I bid on a forgotten slice of land tucked into the ridge outside of Golden Aspen Valley. It was a weird auction lot, remote, unloved, and surrounded by nothing but steep pine-covered slopes and the kind of silence that cities kill. And it was perfect. I bought it clean. No liens, no covenants, no HOA. County records confirmed that the old Gregson property, once belonging to my great-uncle Henry, had been officially surveyed, subdivided, and exempt from all community zoning overlays. When I saw that line on the official plat, private parcel not included in Golden Aspen Ridge, I grinned like a man who just found the last beer in the fridge. I'm an architect. I know how these things work. And I knew, for once, I had found a place where I could build what I wanted, how I wanted, without some polyester-clad committee arguing about which shade of beige is less offensive. It took me 6 months to design the place, a minimalist alpine chalet with low-E glass walls, charcoal steel accents, and a roof line that hugged the terrain like a whisper. Everything, from materials to slope angle, was in compliance with county codes. Every permit was pulled. Every environmental guideline was followed. There was even a snow shed study done just to shut up any theoretical bureaucrat who might care. My house didn't tower, it didn't blare, it didn't even blink. It simply existed the way rocks do, silent, confident, and unmoved. The trouble started with binoculars. I was up at the site watching the early stages of excavation when I noticed a pair of glints from a distant deck down in the valley. Someone watching. At first I assumed it was just curious hikers. But then I saw the binoculars lower and a figure, slim, upright, briskly coiffed, stepped back inside a house that looked like a furniture catalog exploded onto a wine mom's Pinterest board. I didn't think much of it. That was the last time I underestimated her. Her name, I would learn very quickly, was Karen Bartholomew, HOA president, guardian of mountain harmony, and self-proclaimed curator of visual purity. The HOA she ran, Golden Aspen Ridge, was an upscale gated community nestled in the valley bowl below my ridge. Their community had matching fences, mailbox standards, seasonal wreath quotas, and at least 3 couples who regularly wore coordinated tennis outfits to dinner. You get the picture. About a week later, while I was reviewing site plans with my contractor, a brand new Lexus SUV pulled up the gravel road. That road, mind you, is not even marked on the HOA's community maps. It was part of the original parcel easement. Out steps Karen, khakis ironed sharp enough to slice concrete. She didn't wave. She marched. "Excuse me," she called out, not looking at me so much as inspecting me, like I was a rust stain on a white towel. "Hi," I replied cautiously, brushing dust from my hands. She didn't smile. "I'm Karen Bartholomew. I'm president of Golden Aspen Ridge." I nodded slowly. "Nice to meet you. I'm Sam Gregson. This is my property." Her mouth twitched. "Yes? That much is clear. I came because several residents have expressed concerns." I raised an eyebrow. "Concerns?" She pointed toward my foundation. "We've noticed construction activity here. It's quite visible from several of our back decks." I shrugged. "I imagine it would be. You're about 400 feet downhill." "Yes? And unfortunately, that view is protected under our HOA's Community Aesthetics Clause. It's part of the visual charter. The integrity of our mountain skyline has been compromised." I blinked. "You're what?" She cleared her throat. "The architectural view corridor. Our residents paid for unobstructed natural scenery. What you're doing violates the intent of our elevation standards." I let out a slow breath, amused and mildly alarmed. "Karen, and I say this with all due respect, I'm not in your HOA. I'm not even near your HOA." She held up a thick folder, HOA letterhead and all. "We've had our mapping committee analyze your parcel. While technically outside the current jurisdiction, your structure impacts the optical piece of Golden Aspen Ridge. We'll be issuing a formal notice. That was when I realized two things. 1. Karen didn't recognize boundaries. 2. This was going to be fun. I didn't take the folder, I just looked her in the eyes. You're welcome to send whatever you like. But this is private land, legally purchased and approved for residential construction. If you want to contest it, you'll need to talk to the county. She pursed her lips so tight they disappeared. I'm just trying to maintain the character of our community, Mr. Gregson. You may not realize how disruptive this house is. I grinned. It's not a nightclub, Karen. It's a home. She didn't respond. Just turned, stiffly, and returned to her car. As she drove off, I watched her tires kick dust into the air, swirling into the same sky she wanted to keep aesthetically pure. What I didn't know yet, not really, was just how far she was willing to go to protect that precious skyline. Not just letters, not just appearances. Karen was about to go full HOA crusade on me, and I was going to make damn sure every step of it was documented. A week after Karen's surprise visit, I received an envelope that looked like it was trying too hard to be official. Thick cream-colored paper, embossed return address. A golden seal with the words Golden Aspen Ridge Architectural Committee pressed dead center. It was the kind of packaging that screamed, I watched 3 episodes of Suits and now think I'm a paralegal. Inside was a letter. No, a decree. It read like HOA scripture, full of grandiose terms like structural disharmony, visual pollution, and restorative demands. It informed me that my construction had been observed and documented as a violation of the Golden Aspen Ridge community view ordinance and instructed me to cease all further construction, dismantle the second floor within 30 days, repaint the exterior facade in approved natural tones, beige, taupe, or sage, submit for architectural review before resuming any future work. At the bottom, in aggressive cursive, was Karen's signature, complete with the title President, Architectural Committee. I stared at the letter in disbelief, then laughed out loud. It was delusional and also, somehow, deeply performative. This wasn't law, it was theater. My attorney Janine confirmed as much. Sam, this is legally worthless, she said over coffee the next morning. They have no jurisdiction. You're outside their mapped boundaries. This is harassment, not governance. Can we send a response? I asked. Oh, I plan to. In triplicate, she drafted a formal reply on her letterhead and mailed it via certified post. It was surgical, calm, and devastating. It outlined that my parcel was not under HOA jurisdiction, that county permits were fully approved, and that any further attempts to interfere would be considered legal harassment. I signed it with a flourish and even included a printed copy of the official parcel map, just to twist the knife. But Karen wasn't looking for facts. She was looking for leverage. And when paperwork didn't work, she switched tactics. Soon, residents of Golden Aspen Ridge began receiving new letters, this time under the banner of a community alert. These weren't addressed to me. No, they were targeted at the neighbors. They warned of a non-compliant visual obstruction being erected near the northeast ridge, a structure that would negatively impact property values and obstruct scenic views. It called on residents to support the protection of our shared environment and to stand united against external threats to our aesthetic balance. It sounded like propaganda written by someone who just learned the word aesthetic. Karen even included a form letter already addressed to the county development board so residents could sign and send in complaints. All they had to do was add their name, click, and mail. HOA weaponization made easy. One of the residents, an older man named Dave, a retired geologist with a wicked sense of humor, emailed me a copy. He added, "Not all of us are drinking the HOA Kool-Aid. Just thought you'd want to see the script." Then came the kicker. A new envelope arrived, this one hand-delivered by a courier. Inside, a legal complaint from the HOA's attorney. Golden Aspen Ridge was officially suing me. The grounds? Introduction of a disruptive architectural element harmful to the scenic cohesion and spiritual tranquility of the community. I reread that sentence 3 times. Spiritual tranquility. What the hell was I? A pagan god summoning modernism from the mountain. Janine didn't laugh this time. "Okay," she said, tapping the page. "This is where it starts to get dangerous. They're claiming constructive nuisance. It's thin, but they've filed in civil court. They want to sue me for existing. They're trying to establish that your house is a kind of environmental blight. It's absurd, but absurd doesn't mean harmless. A board judge could let this go to hearing. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling hard. Karen's really doing this. Janine nodded. She thinks she's the final line of defense between civilization and whatever sin she thinks your roofline represents. So we prepared. I started collecting everything: permits, zoning maps, aerial photos, even the soil stabilization analysis. Janine filed a motion to dismiss and a motion for sanctions, but before we could even get on the court docket, Karen made another move. She held a community preservation forum at the HOA clubhouse. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I got hold of a video recording. A friend of mine, same geologist, bless him, snuck in a GoPro clipped to his jacket and recorded the whole thing. Karen stood at the front of the room like she was hosting a church revival. "This house threatens the integrity of our skyline," she said, pointing to a slideshow with a red circle around my house like it was a UFO. "This is not a home. It is a visual wound upon our ridge." People applauded. I had to pause the video and walk away for a moment, not because I was upset, but because I was amazed. She had declared war on me, not with laws, but with metaphors. The part that got to me wasn't her nonsense. It was the people nodding, clapping, believing it. It was the realization that HOA power doesn't always come from legal standing. It comes from perception. And Karen was damn good at manufacturing that. So I did the only thing I could. I leaned in. The courthouse was quiet the morning of the hearing. Too quiet for a room about to host the dumbest lawsuit in Colorado's civil history. I arrived early with Janine, who was armed with 3 binders, a flash drive, and the quiet fury of a woman whose breakfast had been interrupted by Karen's emergency supplemental filing. She didn't even bother reading it, just muttered, "There," using the word skyline again, "I can feel it," and shoved it into her bag without looking. The judge assigned to our case was a man named Harvey Eldridge, 60s, silver-haired, and straight out of the grizzled but fair casting category. He didn't smile when he entered the courtroom. He looked tired, like a man who'd seen too many HOA squabbles mutate into ego crusades. Karen was there, of course, seated front and center with her lawyer, a guy in a blue pinstripe suit who looked like he practiced law exclusively by threatening cashiers and quoting bylaws in grocery stores. Karen wore a pearl-colored blazer and a face like she was attending a funeral for civilization. The hearing began. HOA's lawyer stood and launched into a theatrical monologue about mountain identity, visual sanctity, and the trauma of unexpected rooflines. I thought he might cry when he started describing how one resident had to rearrange their living room furniture because of the psychic discomfort caused by my house's angular dominance. Janine scribbled notes while I stared ahead and tried not to laugh. Then it was Judge Eldridge's turn. He tapped his pen against the desk once slowly. "Let me get this straight," he said, voice dry as sandpaper. "You're suing Mr. Gregson for building a home on land he owns, with permits. Because it's visible from your community." Karen's lawyer stood a little straighter. "Yes, Your Honor. We believe the structure constitutes a landscape-level nuisance. It interrupts the visual balance of the environment. Our bylaws state—" "I've read your bylaws," the judge interrupted. "They don't apply to land outside your association. But the view, the judge said, rubbing his eyes, is not a legal entity. You cannot own photons. If you could, we'd all be paying rent to the sun." A few people in the courtroom chuckled. Karen visibly recoiled, as if humor itself was offensive. Eldridge leaned forward. "You're essentially asking the court to declare this man's house a criminal offense against your taste." Karen stood up abruptly. "Your Honor, it's not about taste. It's about preservation. Our homes were purchased under the promise of uninterrupted mountain purity. His construction is a desecration of that." The judge tilted his head. "Ma'am, are you suggesting we rule his house illegal because it's unpleasant to look at from your hot tub?" Karen's face flushed bright red. "We have rights." Eldridge raised one eyebrow. "Not over other people's land, you don't." Janine stood and calmly submitted our documentation: survey maps, permit approvals, time-stamped construction inspections, HOA boundary documents certified by the county. It was a legal nuclear bomb dressed in vinyl tabs and paper clips. Judge Eldridge flipped through a few pages, then closed the folder with finality. unless you can prove this man's property falls within your jurisdiction, which you can't, or that he violated any municipal or state building code, which he didn't, I see no basis for this complaint. You are dismissed." Karen gasped like she'd just been slapped. Her lawyer tried to argue, but Eldridge cut him off with a glance sharp enough to pierce Kevlar. "Counsel," he said, "this is bordering on malicious litigation. You want to push this? I'll start looking at sanctions." That shut them up. I thanked the judge and followed Janine out of the courtroom, but Karen wasn't done. As we walked through the parking lot, she called out to me. "This isn't over, mister. Gregson, I turned already halfway into my truck. It's over for the law, Karen. What else are you going to do? Cast a spell on my shingles?" She didn't answer, just got into her Lexus and slammed the door hard enough to set off her own alarm, which, honestly, was the most satisfying thing I'd heard all day. Back at the site, I felt a momentary sense of victory, but Janine, ever the realist, wasn't celebrating yet. "She won't stop," she said, flipping through her phone. "People like that don't lose well. She'll find another angle, environmental maybe, zoning pressure, harassment. Just be ready." And she was right. Because 2 days later, a man in a tan vest and state-issued boots showed up at the edge of my property holding a clipboard. He introduced himself as a wildlife corridor investigator from the Department of Natural Resources. Apparently, someone had filed a report alleging that my house was disrupting the migration of local mule deer. I blinked at him. "You're kidding." He shrugged. "Nope. Says here your retaining wall is blocking a seasonal path, and that your roof materials are scaring off birds." I looked up at my roof. Matte dark gray composite, low glare, solar absorbing. "I designed that roof to minimize reflection," I said flatly. "And there's no wall, just a graded slope." The inspector nodded. "Well, I gotta walk it anyway." "Protocol, so we did." We walked the slope. He checked erosion patterns, measured angles, noted a few deer tracks that, to his credit, went right through the area without pause. No signs of obstruction, no displaced vegetation, no bird carcasses from fright-induced death spirals. At the end of the walk, he closed his clipboard. "Nothing here," he said. "Looks stable, clean build, no issue." "Can you put that in writing?" I asked. He grinned. "Already in the system." But even as he drove away, I knew exactly who had sent him. Karen wasn't suing anymore. Now she was escalating. The following week, my driveway turned into a procession of uninvited officials. First, it was the Department of Natural Resources. Then it was someone from Soil and Water Conservation, holding a topographic erosion map that looked like it had been printed straight from Windows 95. After that came a man from the county fire marshal's office, asking if my roof materials were too reflective for air response units during wildfire season. Each of them looked mildly confused, mildly annoyed, and deeply apologetic by the time they left. Turns out Karen had filed complaints with 4 different agencies, all citing various public safety concerns about my build. It was impressive in a way, like watching someone try to sink a battleship with Post-it notes. But even as each report came back clean, I knew the goal wasn't to win. It was to wear me down. I started documenting everything, every visit, every conversation. I installed a second trail cam facing the road and mounted a GoPro in my front window, just in case someone decided to escalate from bureaucracy to vandalism. I'd seen this game before, death by paperwork. And Karen was playing to stall, not to succeed. Then came the flyers. One morning, I hiked down the ridge to check my mailbox, a steel post box I had to reinforce after a bear got curious last spring, and found a glossy printout folded inside. I unfolded it. At the top, "Community at risk, one man's house, our shared loss." Below it was a photo of my house, grainy and zoomed in from a telephoto lens. Underneath, "Disrupting wildlife, damaging property values, destroying views." The back listed a call to action: support the HOA special assessment vote, help fund the legal defense of our neighborhood's integrity. And below that, in smaller text, "Requested donation, $1,200 per household." I nearly choked on my coffee. Karen wasn't just tripling down. She was trying to get the entire community to pay for her obsession. That evening, I got a call from Dave, the retired geologist who'd sent me the HOA leak earlier. His voice was low, like he was calling from a phone booth in occupied France. "Sam," he said, "you might want to come to the clubhouse tomorrow." Karen holding another PowerPoint apocalypse. Sort of. "She's calling for a special vote. Wants to amend the budget to cover extended litigation costs and expert witness fees for the lawsuit that already got laughed out of court. She's calling it Phase 2. Claims she's building a long-term strategy to redefine jurisdictional relevance, which I think is HOA for throw more money into the void. I showed up. I wasn't technically allowed inside, but that didn't stop me from parking nearby and listening through the propped open side window. Inside, Karen was in full performance mode again. She had diagrams, charts, and even a printed quote from a vision therapy consultant who claimed that angular roof lines disrupt subconscious stress processing in the visual cortex. I'm not making that up. I heard her say it twice. But this time, the room didn't sound so compliant. Voices challenged her. Someone asked why dues were going up when they'd already lost in court. Another homeowner, a younger guy, probably mid-30s, asked whether Karen had even consulted the board before sending out legal documents in the community's name. That's when things cracked. A woman stood up. I couldn't see her, but her voice was clear. I called the county myself. His land's private. He did everything by the book. We're paying thousands for your vendetta, Karen. Karen snapped back that this was a moral imperative, that community standards must be defended, and that, if we don't act now, others will follow. She sounded less like an HOA president and more like a Cold War general predicting an avalanche of modernist cabins. The room turned. The vote failed. I heard it. I felt it. The energy shifted from obedience to irritation. Karen stormed out not long after, nearly knocking over a table with a cheese platter on her way. The next morning, I found another envelope shoved into my gate. It was handwritten. Inside, a note. We don't all agree with her. Keep building. Some of us actually like the view. L. And taped to the back, a donation receipt to the county's wildfire fund, in my name. It wasn't just Karen anymore. People were picking sides. I wish I could say the failed vote ended things. That Karen took the hint, packed her binders, and retreated into whatever pastel cavern she came from. But no, that would require self-awareness. And Karen had the stubborn resilience of a poorly configured Roomba, bouncing off walls, ignoring boundaries, and hell-bent on returning to the same corner again and again. A week after the vote, I got a knock on my door. Not a clipboard, not an inspector. A knock. It was a man in a neat gray suit with a county seal on his badge. He introduced himself as Thomas Avery from the Zoning Review Board. Behind him stood a younger woman with a laptop and a measuring wheel. I gestured toward the slope behind me. Let me guess, someone reported my porch for being too smug? Avery cracked a grin. No, sir. But we did receive a zoning variance complaint alleging structural encroachment onto unimproved public land. We're just here to verify. He held up a faded copy of an old trail map. According to this mystery complainant, my east retaining wall overlapped a historical footpath, one supposedly recorded in a 1973 Parks Department archive. Except, I said, pointing to my survey stakes, that footpath hasn't existed for 40 years, and I have a certified parcel map from last year, signed by the county surveyor. Avery nodded. We figured. Still have to check it out, though. So we walked. Me, Avery, the assistant with the laptop, and a deeply offended bluebird who kept dive-bombing my head like I'd insulted his nest. It took about an hour, but the verdict was clear. The wall was fully within bounds. The public land was a ghost, deregistered, absorbed, and reassigned to private holdings 3 decades ago. They left with polite apologies and promised a written report within 72 hours. I thanked them and offered cold water, professionalism all around. And yet, the sheer fact that they'd come, again, told me everything. Karen had moved from institutions to paperwork warfare, and she wasn't alone. Later that evening, Janine called. She sounded pissed, which was rare. Normally, she kept the composure of a FedEx delivery driver at peak Christmas rush. Irritated, but functional. This time, she was livid. They filed a motion, she snapped. An amendment to the original lawsuit, even after dismissal. Can they do that? No, not legally. But it's styled as a motion to reconsider, claiming new evidence. Supposedly a realignment of jurisdictional boundaries based on an old deed. My heart dropped. You mean forged maps? She sighed. We'll find out tomorrow. I've already pulled county records and requested originals. But if this is what I think it is, they're using a fake plat overlay to claim your lot falls within HOA airspace. Airspace? Basically, they're alleging visual jurisdiction, like how cities sometimes regulate billboard placement. But this isn't a city, and HOA can't enforce anything outside their lines. Unless those lines change. Janine was quiet for a second. I've seen this once before. Down in Arizona. HOA redrew their map, snuck it into the county archive without proper hearings. Took 2 years to undo. The guy died before it got fixed. Jesus. Don't worry. We're not letting that happen. I've already booked a meeting with the county recorder's office. The next morning, we met at the county archive. It smelled like old paper, lemon cleaner, and budget to spare. Janine moved like a predator. Heels sharp, laptop open, printouts ready. We were led to a terminal by an overworked clerk named Marcy, who handed us 3 key documents: the original plat, the HOA charter overlay, and the newly filed jurisdictional revision labeled as Amendment 12B. We stared at it. It was sloppy. The lines had been redrawn using GIS software, sure, but without proper surveyor stamps. They'd expanded the HOA by exactly 422 feet uphill, just enough to touch my property line. No legal basis, no hearing, no vote. Illegal, Janine muttered, snapping photos. We've got them. But the damage was already rippling. That evening, I received a cease and desist letter, this time from a third-party law firm representing a coalition of HOA residents. Not Karen directly, but a group she'd rallied. They accused me of knowingly building on contested land and threatened to pursue damages for property devaluation and community disruption. I laughed so hard I dropped my beer. But when I turned back to my driveway, I noticed something new. A drone, hovering, watching. That drone became a regular visitor. At first, it hovered cautiously, 10, maybe 15 feet above the tree line, its little blinking light twinkling like a smug star. Then it got bolder, swooping lower each day, circling the property at dusk. Once I stood on the deck with my coffee and stared straight into its lens, middle finger raised like a patriotic salute. It zipped off, offended or triumphant. I couldn't tell. By the third day, I was over it. I called the sheriff's office. Not 911, just the local dispatch. A deputy named Elena Ortiz came out that afternoon, driving a dusty SUV with one burnout taillight and a dent in the front bumper that looked suspiciously fist-sized. She listened patiently as I explained the drone's behavior. I showed her the footage from my trail cams and the time-stamped videos from the GoPro aimed at the sky. She squinted at the screen and muttered, "Persistent little bastard." Exactly. Technically, there was no law preventing someone from flying a drone over my property, not unless it entered private airspace below a certain altitude or peered into windows. But repeated flyovers could count as harassment. Deputy Ortiz took a few notes, shrugged, and said, "We'll knock on some doors. No promises. HOA folks are special." That was putting it mildly. The next day, I noticed my mailbox had been opened. Not just checked, but forced open at the hinge. Nothing stolen, but definitely tampered with. Then came the emails, 3 of them. All anonymous. All written in the same performative faux legal tone that could only belong to someone who once audited a paralegal seminar on YouTube. They accused me of weaponizing the media, of spreading falsehoods about the community, and of inciting division. One of them included a grainy zoomed-in photo of me walking down my own driveway, taken from the ridge above. That night, I met Janine at a bar near the county line. Not the fancy wine bar in town, but a real place. Sawdust on the floor, jukebox stuck on 80s hits, bartender who didn't ask questions. We sat in a booth, lit by a flickering neon sign that buzzed like a dying wasp. "I think they're watching me now," I said, sliding my phone across the table. Janine scrolled through the emails, then the drone footage. Her expression didn't change. This is stalking. Karen-level stalking. She's weaponizing paranoia. She's got enough to open a damn armory. Janine leaned in. "We need to strike back. No more defense. No more waiting for the next move." I raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" She smiled, a shark smile. A counterclaim, defamation, harassment, abuse of legal process, maybe even intentional infliction of emotional distress. I blinked. That's a real charge. In this state? Yep. It's rarely used, but when it lands, it hits hard. We spent the next week building a case. I compiled every document, every inspection report, every zoning letter, drone video, HOA flyer, anonymous email, mailbox photo, and public record I had. Janine drafted a legal brief so sharp it could have sliced granite. We requested the original HOA charter, dug up board meeting minutes, and traced every alteration to the boundary lines since Golden Aspen Ridge was incorporated in 1998. Then we filed. Officially, Samuel Gregson versus Golden Aspen Ridge HOA and Karen Bartholomew individually and as acting president. The local news caught wind within 2 days. A reporter from Channel 9, a young guy with too much gel in his hair and the permanent expression of someone trying to remember if he left the stove on, showed up at my house. I gave him the full tour. We stood on the deck. I pointed toward the valley. "See that?" I said. "That's Golden Aspen Ridge. They're suing me because I exist." He laughed nervously. "You mean because your house is visible?" "Exactly. I ruined their view. We did the interview at sunset. Behind me, the mountains turned gold and red like they were dipped in fire. I didn't need to say much. The view did the talking. The story aired that Friday. By Saturday morning, I had 36 emails from people I'd never met. Some were supportive. Others shared their own HOA horror stories. One woman said her HOA fined her for drying clothes on a line. Another said they painted her fence without asking, then charged her for the paint. But one message stood out. It came from someone inside the HOA board. No name, just, "You're not alone. Some of us want her gone too." Wait for the next board meeting, change was coming. And this time, I wasn't the only one pushing. The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening, not in some grand hall or fancy HOA office, but in the Golden Aspen Ridge Community Center, a painfully beige building that looked like it had been designed by someone who hated joy. I wasn't invited, obviously, but that didn't mean I wasn't prepared. A few hours before the meeting, I parked my truck on a county-maintained fire access road about 100 yards uphill from the community center. I hiked through the brush with a folding chair, a thermos of coffee, and my drone controller, my own little eye in the sky. FAA registered, altitude limited, and perfectly legal. I'd named it Karen Repellent. From my perch, I had a clear line of sight through the upper windows. I wasn't filming anything illegal, just gathering vibes. The meeting started on schedule, and it looked tense from the jump. I couldn't hear words, but body language said everything. Karen stood at the front, arms folded, pacing like a dictator with a bad back. She had a projector, of course, and was showing slides, probably some cherry-picked photos of my house, bathed in ominous lighting, like it was a Bond villain's lair. But then came the first interruption. A man in a navy blazer, mid-50s, tired eyes, homeowner energy, stood up and said something. Karen tried to wave him off, but he didn't sit down. Another woman chimed in, then a third. The momentum shifted like a tide turning. I watched her composure crack, her arms tightening, voice rising. She was losing control. Down below, Janine was inside. As a licensed attorney with a filed counterclaim, she had every right to observe. And she wasn't just observing. She was recording everything on a body cam pinned to her blazer. That footage became gold. Karen, cornered and defensive, let it all out. She admitted, on camera, that she personally submitted the zoning complaint to the Department of Natural Resources. She laughed about tricking the rookies at the recorder's office. She bragged about the drone surveillance. At one point, she literally said the words, "I don't care what the law says. We were here first, and that view is ours." Game over. By Friday, Janine had filed a supplement to our lawsuit, including the new footage. But the bigger bombshell came from the inside. The anonymous board member? They revealed themselves. Mark Pennington, treasurer of the HOA, CPA by trade. Quiet guy, always in the background. He called me directly. "Sam, I've had enough," he said. I joined the board to manage landscaping budgets, not fund some suburban holy war. He agreed to sign an affidavit detailing how Karen had been bypassing votes, forging minutes, and spending HOA funds on private investigations, including the drone. And then he sent me the receipts, invoices to a private security company, payments from HOA accounts, a check to Bartholomew Consulting, a shell company in her maiden name. We didn't just have a case. We had evidence of financial fraud. Janine nearly squealed. This isn't just civil anymore. This is criminal. The next week was a hurricane. Janine filed a motion to escalate the case to Superior Court, citing abuse of fiduciary duty and misappropriation of HOA funds. We requested a forensic audit. The Sheriff's Department opened an inquiry. Karen was subpoenaed. And the residents, they turned. Some emailed me to apologize. Others thanked me for exposing her. One even dropped off a pie, pecan, still warm, with a sticky note that read, "For the guy who broke the HOA curse." But Karen, she didn't go quietly. I came home one night to find my driveway spray-painted in red. "Eyesore. Go back to Texas." And next to it, a plastic deer lawn ornament, decapitated, horns glued on upside down, a grotesque parody of the protected wildlife she had claimed to champion. It was absurd, and it was war. But now, I wasn't just defending my house. I was defending truth. And I had backup. They say the mountains don't echo unless you scream into them. Well, I didn't have to scream. The paperwork did it for me. By the time the audit team showed up at the Golden Aspen Ridge HOA office, 2 investigators and county windbreakers with hard drives and clipboards, Karen was already in freefall. Her name was removed from the HOA's public website. Residents had called an emergency vote for her dismissal. Mark, the treasurer, had submitted every shred of financial data from the past 3 years, down to the receipts for catered luncheons and community engagement seminars held at her favorite winery. I didn't go to the final court hearing just to win. I went to finish what she started. Janine and I sat side by side in the packed courtroom, flanked by journalists and a couple of homeowners who'd become unlikely friends, ex-enemies of circumstance, now cheering me on like I was a local hero. Judge Eldridge presided, that same half-grimace tugging at his cheek like he was torn between laughter and contempt. Karen entered with her attorney, a guy who looked like he practiced law from a Craigslist ad. Her face was stiff. She avoided eye contact. No more bluster, no press conferences, no printed leaflets. The case was swift. We presented the drone footage, the HOA charter showing we were outside their jurisdiction, the forged meeting minutes, the invoices to her shell company, the recordings from the board meeting where she all but admitted to everything short of building her own private gulag. Her attorney tried the usual dance. Misunderstandings, passion for community standards, miscommunication with third-party vendors. Judge Eldridge wasn't having it. "I'm not here to litigate her feelings about topography," he said. "I'm here to determine whether this was abuse of power, misuse of funds, and illegal harassment. And the answer is yes, yes, and hell, yes." He didn't just dismiss their original lawsuit. He awarded me $190,000 in damages for the countersuit. Emotional distress, legal costs, loss of short-term rental income, and reputational harm. Karen was fined $50,000 personally for abuse of authority and making false environmental claims to a government agency. The judge also recommended the county district attorney review the case for criminal charges related to fraud and misappropriation. Karen's jaw clenched. Her lawyer scribbled notes with a shaking hand. The courtroom rustled like a forest before a storm, half shock, half relief. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded me. I didn't say much, just held up the deed, smiled, and said, "This house was never the problem." Their control was the story spread. Local news, regional blogs, even one national HOA watchdog site picked it up with the headline, "The View War Ends in Disaster for HOA Queen." Back on my land, the sky felt wider. Construction wrapped up 2 weeks later. The final touches were small. Copper gutters, native landscaping, a set of stone steps that led to the lookout point. But the most satisfying detail was the sign I installed at the bottom of the slope, facing the valley below. Simple black letters on brushed steel. "This view is mine, and it's legally protected." A week after the trial, Golden Aspen Ridge held its new board elections. Karen didn't show up. She'd moved. I heard, quietly. The house sold under market value. At the next county town hall, I was invited to speak. Lessons in HOA overreach. I stood at the same podium where people usually argued about potholes and noise ordinances and told them what I'd learned. That fear, dressed up in bylaws, still looks like fear. That property lines may be invisible, but respect has weight. That if someone builds a house and your first instinct is to tear it down, maybe the problem isn't the house. People applauded. Someone asked if I planned to run for office. I laughed. God, no. I just want to sit on my deck and enjoy the damn view. And that's what I did that evening. Whiskey in hand, sun sinking low. No drones, no shouting. Just the rustle of wind through pine and the long golden hush of a valley that had finally gone quiet.